welcome back, everyone. Meeting number 25, the House of Commons Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage. Pursuant to the order of reference on February 16th, committee resumes clause-by-clause consideration of Bill C-10, which we started on Friday. We continue today for a 2-hour format. Just as a note, as you know, we've had a motion passed a few weeks ago regarding seeking out extra time, if possible, for the consideration of C-10. So just as advance notice for this coming Friday, if we have to carry this over into Friday, I'll be scheduling a 3-hour meeting once again. Okay. All right. So we'll do the same timing as the last time. So, of course, we're still in a hybrid format. I forgot to mention this the last time, by the way, but screenshots, taking photos of your screen is not permitted. I know you may already know that, but I just thought I'd add that. But don't forget, we've been good so far, but please don't speak until I recognize your name. And it's not because I want to feel intoxicated with all the power of being a chair. It's just rather I give the power to, or allow Hansard to the opportunity to make things all right in their world. Because as I said before, it's sometimes can get confusing enough in person. You can imagine in this hybrid format. And I shouldn't even say hybrid because we're all online with the exception of staff. So I guess we're going virtual completely. I just want to say one other thing. We made a slight change last time in the voting and how we proceed on carrying or not each individual clause or amendment. So just to recap how this works, I will ask if it carries. Either the amendment, if does the amendment carry? If I met with silence, it will carry. If you want to support it or oppose it, but you don't want to go to a recorded vote, you have two options. You can say on division or carried on division, or you can say negative on division. If you say that, if you say negative or carry on division, and someone else says no or yes, I will automatically go to a recorded vote. Okay? I think, and thank you, Mr. Housefather. I think you helped us out there last time. I think that's a fairly good system. We only used it once, but just in case you don't want to go to recorded vote and move on, you have now the option of, remember, carry on division or negative on division. Thank you. Okay, for the folks who are watching us from outside of our virtual room here, those of us on the webcast, I'm just going to do one explanatory thing, and that is when we do the clauses, within the clauses, most everyone has submitted possible amendments and for consideration whether they're ruled in order or not. That's something else, but we're going to go in order as to from one up until the end for the amendments that are coming in. We have amendments from 6 different groups. We have amendments from PV, so you have like PV1, Parti Vert, which is the Green Party. And we also have Lib1 or Lib2 or whatever. That's from the Liberal Party members, the Liberal members on the caucus or in the committee. CPC will be the Conservative Party members on this committee. BQ, Bloc Québécois, from the Bloc for the member on the committee. And NDP1 or NDP2, that's from the NDP member on the committee. And the final category is G. Yes, we do get we do get to do government amendments, and we have a few of them here. So they will be G1, G2, and so on. Okay, that being said, I think we have, Ms. McPherson, are you back? Yeah. Okay, all right. So let's get going. The last we left off, we were at NDP 7. Is everybody ready to go on that? NDP 7, and we were dealing with a sub-amendment by Mr. Housefather. Now, to pick this up again, Mr. Housefather, can I call on you to start this?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman, but I believe there have been some discussions that that may just can I just withdraw this sub amendment?
Yes, you can, by all means.
I'll just withdraw this sub amendment.
Okay, and seeing no dissension about that, no one has any issues with that. We're withdrawing the sub amendment. We now go back to the main amendment of NDP 7. Ms. DeBruce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to propose a sub-amendment to NDP 7. And if I may, the first part of this sub-amendment would be to F, and would be to insert the word production after and other human resources in the creation, comma, and then it would say production and presentation of programming. And then add after presentation of programming, unless the nature of the service provided by the undertaking, comma, such as specialized content or format or the use of languages other than French and English, comma, renders that use impractical, another comma, in which case the undertaking shall make the greatest practicable use of those resources. And then the sub-amendment would go on to the F.1 part of NDP 7 to add after the words and other human resources and I would suggest adding shall contribute in an equitable manner to strongly support the creation, comma, production and presentation of Canadian programming.
You certainly have had a discussion. That's quite an amendment. I'm going to have to slow things down a little bit because I can only imagine that there are several pens and perhaps keyboards tapping feverishly to get in what you just said. Was there something submitted in writing, Mr. Bruce? Yes.
Oh, I wish I could say yes, but this is Monday morning. No, we do not have it in writing. I'm
Okay.
happy to read it again if necessary.
Well, I'm just turning to my, I guess, either our clerk or legislative clerk to say if they need a little bit of time. I know what I can do in the meantime. Uh, let's talk to our legislative clerk. Do you have any questions, sir?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. Yes, usually it is required to have a written version of all amendment and sub-amendments, particularly in this case where it's such a long one. Unless you're willing to repeat it several times so we can make sure we have it at the right place and the right wording.
Just one moment. Just before you do that, is there any way that you can communicate with Philippe in writing with that? I say that because I can actually buy some time because I forgot to introduce our special guest from Canadian Heritage. So while I do that, how about you have in the middle of a sub amendment, have a sub conversation about passing on some of this material so that we can ingest it as we now take it from the floor. We don't have it in writing at this point. Ms. McPherson, should I go to you first, or would you rather wait until the text is in?
I was just going to say I can send the text if that's necessary.
Oh,
But
I see. Okay.
If Julie has it and can send it, that would be fine too.
Ms. DeBruzen, go ahead.
I can send it if I could just have Mr. Mella's appropriate the email that he would like it to.
Okay. Mr. Mella, I think you would have her coordinates. Do you want to send your email to her?
Yeah, I was going to suggest that I could send it to Ms. Dabruzen P9 account.
Okay.
Okay. In the meantime, as I mentioned, and I overlooked doing this, and to our special guest, that's no reflection on the service that you provide to this country. So my apologies, but I do want to, if you're watching on our webcast, I want to welcome once again Mr. Thomas Owen Ripley, who's Director General, Broadcasting, Copyright, and Creative Marketplace. We have Drew Olson, who is the Senior Director, Marketplace and Legislative Policy. Kathy Joy, who's a manager of industry and social policy, broadcasting, copyright, and creative marketplace. And Patrick Smith, who's the senior analyst of marketplace and legislative policy, who did a smash-up job last Friday, and here you are again, doing much of the same. So we welcome you once more as we call upon you for this important time. Now, in the meantime, I'd see Mr. Shields has his hand up. Mr. Shields.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As we're waiting for it, but I thought maybe Mr. Brusen could just sort of clarify her rationale for the changes as we don't see it in front of us. Maybe she can do that.
The only thing is, I think she's doing type. It's probably difficult for her to type and talk at the same time, I would imagine. Yeah. So she'll be with you in just a little bit. Oh, sorry, Mr. Brusen, go ahead.
I've been typing. Okay. So there are a couple of reasons. The first part was just to add production, so that's a pretty simple one. I don't think that needs much conversation. The other part was to not have an unintended consequence. The wording that we're actually bringing back in is in the original act. It's wording that's already in the Broadcasting Act. We're bringing that back, and it's to make sure that we're not having an unintended consequence on services that do not produce shows or do not produce in French and English, like in third languages, and so wouldn't be able to fit with these rules. So those are the primary ones, and then the part about strong support for the creation, production, and presentation of Canadian programming. That's just strengthening the importance of Canadian stories and music, and making sure that we're supporting that.
Mr. Shields.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. How far along are we? I think, thank you for that, Ms. DeBruzen, and we'll just wait for confirmation on receiving the text. Just looking around the board, if I could get, everybody have, and a show of thumb or a nodding, a genuine understanding of what's being proposed in this sub-amendment? Mr. Watt.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So this, as you said on Friday, NDP 7 would replace the Block 5, right? And we also had G2, which was not carried on Friday. So this amendment to the NDP 7, then we would not look at BQ5 if passed then, right?
Okay, yeah, let me just clarify. Thank you for that question. Actually, that provides clarification. Okay, so if NDP 7 is adopted, BQ5 cannot be moved due to the conflict, as you pointed. There's a line conflict, as we call it. Yes, what had happened on Friday was there was a proposed sub-amendment, but that has been withdrawn, as you've just heard by Mr. Housefather. So here we are now with Ms. DeBruzen's sub-amendment for NDP 7. Ms. DeBruzen.
Thank you. Just while we're waiting, the other thing that I was hoping to highlight, and someone whose francophone might be able to help me more with this, is that my understanding is that the choice of words in the French part of NDP 7 does not reflect the strength of the English language chosen in the translation. I'm trying to zero in on the exact words, but I wanted to highlight that. Maybe someone else can speak to it. But if the English language translation can be given prominence or precedence, and then the French translated from that.
I'm going to turn to Mr. Mela on this one. Mr. Mela, are you able to answer that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's hard for me to debate the language. I assume the amendment has been drafted in English to start with, and been translated by specialized people, legal translators in-house. So I don't think I can comment on the content in terms of French versus English.
Yes, I think it bears repeating because it's an amendment, sub-amendment from the floor. I think we're going to repeat it just to make sure that we have this right in both languages in the absence of the writing. Mr. Champoux.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I wanted to put my 2 cents worth into this linguistic question. You can see the difference between the difference in scope in English and French, but this is a question we could ask Mr. Mela. In English, there is mention of, just let me find it here. I'm reading it here in French. Oh, I'm sorry, I lost my place. I will find it, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Yes, once again, I stress the importance of doing this from the floor. Sorry, Mr. Champoux, do you have what you're looking for? Okay.
Wait.
Yes. So there is mention of each foreign online undertaking shall make the greatest practicable use
Creative
and so on. Et en français,
And in French, les entreprises étrangères en ligne.
la proposition est dans toute la mesure possible pour renforcer un peu
And that strengthens. The French wording seems to be stronger. Perhaps Mr. Mela could reassure us of the strength of the intent in each version. The French seems to have less teeth than the English.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, this is a measure of intent, not interpretation. I understand. So I don't know if Mr. Mela is available to comment on that right now. Mr. Mela?
Uh, it looks the same to me, but then again, you have to keep in mind that the translation has to take in consideration the whole bill in terms of what has been used in the whole bill and in that amendment as well. So maybe that language is used elsewhere in the bill. That's why it was used there. But all in all, it appears to be of same strengths and value.
So, Mr. Shampoo, I'm going to ask you to respond to that. I'd like to get your comfort level on this before we proceed. Go ahead.
je voulais avoir.
Well, I wanted to have Mr. Mela's opinion just to reassure myself what would have been understood while interpreting the bill in French and English. It seemed to me that the English version was a bit stronger. That's why I had some hesitation regarding the French version. But if Mr. Mela reassures me that they're both of the same strength, then that satisfies me.
Okay. Let's go back and get an update because I really would like to read this into the record one more time, only because, like I say, we're doing this from the floor as opposed to in writing. So, Mr. Mela, I'm going to gauge your comfort level before I go to Mr. Brusen to read the sub-amendment once again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have the sub-amendment once included in the amendment. I can read that if that's better.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah,
That's okay.
that's fine.
So F would read as follows. F, each Canadian broadcasting undertaking shall employ and make maximum use and in no case less than prominent use of Canadian creative and other human resources in the creation, production, and presentation of programming, unless the nature of the service provided by the undertaking, such as specialized content or format or the use of languages other than French and English, renders that use impractical, in which case the undertaking shall make the greatest practical use of those resources. F1 would read as follows. Each foreign online undertaking shall make the greatest practical use of Canadian creative and other human resources and shall contribute in an equitable manner to strongly support the creation, production, and presentation of Canadian programming in accordance with the objective of the broadcasting policy set out in this subsection and taking into account the linguistic duality of the market they serve.
Okay, I guess we don't need Mr. Brusen to repeat it. I think is everybody at a comfort level with this? And Ms. McPherson.
Sorry, just I think it might have just been a small error, but when he was reading the F section, he said prominent, not predominant. And I just want to clarify that it is in fact predominant, not prominent.
Monsieur Mela?
I think it was just a small error.
Yes, sorry. Yes, it is predominant. And just to add, my colleague just checked the act. And indeed, the point that Mr. Shampoo was putting forward is translated in the act the same way.
Excellent work. Thank you to our legislative clerks. How they managed to keep this, they managed to keep this language in their head, moving around and make sense of it is always beyond me. And now is an appropriate time to say thank you for all that you do. That being said, I go back to Ms. McPherson. You still want to, your hand is up. Do you want, you're done? Okay. And Mr. Shampoo, s'il vous plaît.
Est-ce que
Would I be asking too much patience from the committee if I asked Mr. Mela to read the amendment and sub-amendment in French?
Mr. Mela?
Oui, vous abuseriez parce que
Yes, you would, because I don't have that version. I'm sorry. It's no problem.
I think this kind of puts us, yes, in an awkward situation. Obviously, with like I say, from the floor, because we do not have it in writing, it becomes difficult to do, Mr. Shampoo. Were you okay with the translation? Sorry, the interpretation as you heard it?
je l'ai écouté dans la langue originale, Monsieur le Président, pour le suivre en anglais d'abord. Je pensais qu'on allait aussi.
Oh, I was listening on the floor because Mr. Mela didn't have the French version, but I do have it in front of me. Would he like for me to read it, or should I just trust the fact that Mr. Mela spoke to it?
To see that you're on a comfortable level, would you like to go ahead and read that, Mr. Shampoo?
Alors, F,
Sorry,
les
Mr. Chair?
entreprises de radio. Oui,
Sorry,
pardon.
One moment, Mr. Shampoo.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Sorry to interrupt. Once Mr. Shampoo reads that into the record, this will become the translation of the amendment. The office of the law clerk won't be able to provide a new one. So just to make sure what we're doing.
Okay, Mr. Shampoo. Baron, there's no conflict, of course, between the two. I did offer you the chance to read it en français if you want to, but why don't you go ahead?
Écoutez,
Well, that adds some more pressure, knowing that the version that I will read here now will be the final version. Perhaps my colleagues would prefer to trust the legislative clerks and the legal translators.
Okay, that sounds like a good idea. Mr. Housefather.
Moi, je voudrais juste dire.
I would just like to say that I trust Mr. Shampoo's translation, and I would be very pleased if he read it. This is a very substantial amendment, so I think it's important that we also have the French version. So I would prefer that for him to read the French version.
Mr. Shampoo, things seem coming back to you.
Alors, allons-y.
Okay, let's go. Here it is in French. F. Each Canadian broadcasting undertaking shall employ and make maximum use of Canadian creative and other human resources in the creation, or rather, and in no to maximum use and in no case less than predominant use in the creation, production, and presentation of their program, unless it is too difficult given the nature of the undertaking, including its content or specialized format, or if it is in a language other than French or English, in which case it will have to make use of these resources as much as possible. F1, foreign online undertakings shall make the greatest practicable use of Canadian creative and other human resources, and shall contribute in an equitable manner in order to strongly support the objectives of broadcasting policy set out in this subsection, taking into account the linguistic duality of the market they serve.
Okay. Mr. Housefather, your hand is up. Did you want to speak again? Go ahead.
Oui, j'avais juste.
Yes, I have a question for Martin. Martin, I think that you read one word that was incorrect. I'd just like to look at that together. I believe F1 says, each foreign online undertaking shall make the greatest practicable use. But when you read it, you said something different. You didn't use the preposition de in French. Thank you for correcting me. That is right.
Okay, folks. Okay. Thank you very much. But again, I ask everyone to try to do this through the chair so I can identify who's speaking for those taking record. And also one of the other things, I'm not saying that you folks did this, but when we read things off paper, we tend to speak much quicker. Can I ask that when you're reading from a paper, please slow down? That was a valiant effort. It's not that you made a mistake, don't get me wrong, but I do it too sometimes. So I'm reminding myself as well as you. So Any further conversation on, Mr. Shampoo, I see your hand is up. Are you finished? Do you want to speak again?
Simplement pour préciser.
Just to specify that Mr. Housefather was right, I left out a preposition in French. It was my mistake.
Excusez-moi,
Right.
Mr.
I'm
Chair.
glad we have that clear.
Excusez-moi, Mr. Chair.
Any further discussion on
Oh.
what is proposed in the sub-amendment
Mr.
by
Chair,
Ms. de Bruzen? I hear a voice, but I don't see. Oh,
it's the legislative rook.
oh, Mr. Mella, sorry.
Sorry to interrupt again. In the act, the same language is indicated as dans toute la mesure du possible. So if that would be suitable, si Monsieur
If Mr. Shampoo agrees, we can use as much as possible or dans la mesure du possible.
dans toute la mesure du possible.
Mr. Shampoo.
Mr. Shampoo. Mr. Chair, I thought I did read it out perfectly the first time. I fully agree.
Merci.
Thank you.
Okay. Any further discussion, folks? Seeing none, we now go on to the question. Now for the vote. This is the sub-amendment of NDP 7 is put forward by Madame de Bruzen. I understand everyone has a general comprehension of this now, or at least for goodness sakes, I hope. Shall the sub-amendment carry? Carried. Now we go back to the main motion of NDP 7, which is on page 24 of your document. NDP 7, seeing no discussion, we will go to a vote. Shall NDP 7 carry?
As amended,
So
Mr.
carried.
Chair.
Oh, sorry, as amended, yes, my apologies. Done so. It is carried as amended. Thank you, Mr. Miller. Now, NDP 7 being adopted because of the line conflict, that means that BQ5 cannot be moved. As a result of that, I don't think I need to explain line conflict. We went through this last time. Okay. So let's move on now to, give me one moment, please. We now go on to BQ6. And I see Mr. Shampoo. BQ6.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chair, the proposed amendment suggests removing the mention of a programming control, rather. I think it would be confusing, and it would just say broadcast, period.
Okay. Do we have any discussion on BQ6? Ms. Ian?
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to my colleague for bringing this forward. We see BQ6 as similar to NDP6, which we have already discussed. We think at this point that this is not the place to discuss user-generated content. We don't feel that it should not be rather regulated. Our government has been very clear on this point. We are going to bring forward a bill that deals with this and look forward to debating that in the House on the floor. But at this point, this is something that we don't feel is necessary or appropriate.
Mr. Shampoo?
Monsieur le Président, là où
Mr. Chair, I have a difference in opinion with my colleague in that we know that social media and online companies do have control over their programming and the content that they broadcast. Much more control than they admit. And I think that we can legislate in the Broadcasting Act regarding what concerns broadcasting, and I don't believe there would be conflict with a future bill that has not been tabled yet in any case, so we can't speak to it. There would not be any conflict on the nature of the content broadcast. In my opinion, it's important for online companies, including social media, take responsibility to the extent they are able to do so on the content that they broadcast. And I don't need to remind you of many relatively recent examples of user-generated content, rather, that easily could have been avoided. Tragedies that were broadcast in full online that are still available in certain places online. I think it's our duty to solve this problem. We can do it now without waiting for the next bill.
Okay, Ms. Ian, I see your hand up. You want to comment further?
Yes, I do. And if my honorable colleague needs more on this, I would love to go to our government representatives to provide that clarity as to why we want to separate this at this time.
Okay, as we normally do, I'm going to ask that you, not a virtual hand, but perhaps your actual hand itself in this world. Mr. Ripley, would you like to respond?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the question. So as the committee is aware, one of the objectives of Bill C-10 is to clarify and enlarge the definition of broadcasting to be clear that it includes online undertakings. And this clarification around programming under their control has been included to clarify that or to recognize the fact that in many instances, in some instances now moving forward, you will have online undertakings that are distributing content generated by other users, and from the government's perspective, striking out the limitation with respect to programming under their control would mean that those undertakings, when they are distributing the content of others, would be responsible for that content, even though they may not have played any role necessarily in the editorial control of it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. I see. Oh, yes, Mr. Champoux.
Je comprends très, très bien.
I fully understand the points raised by the department and by my colleagues. However, there's much platforms can do to prevent behavior such as that which we've already seen. I think we can take some of the responsibility away from the content that is broadcast, but it's still, no matter which way you slice it, is the platform's responsibility because they need to make sure that their subscribers respect standards. I don't think that here we are suggesting that Facebook is 100% responsible for editorial content, but Facebook still must be responsible, have some responsibility over that content, and they must be held to taking much more action than they have in the recent past. I think that the Broadcasting Act needs to reaffirm that, and that's why I think we need to impose certain accountability on their programming.
Okay, seeing no further discussion, let's proceed to the vote. And again, I remind everybody, this is BQ6 in your document, and you've just heard the discussion. Now we go to a vote. Shall the amendment carry?
No.
No.
Hearing no, we're going to go to a recorded vote. Madam Clerk?
Yes, sir. The vote on BQ6. Mr. Housefather.
No.
Madame Bissette.
No.
Mr. Bruson.
No.
Ms. Ian.
No.
Mr. Lewis.
Yes.
Monsieur Reyes.
No.
Mr. Aitchison.
No.
Mr. Shields. Mr. Shields.
No.
Mr. Waugh.
No.
Mr. Champoux.
En faveur.
Ms. McPherson.
Yes.
9 nays, 2 yeas.
I declare the amendment negative. Now, folks, we move on to BQ7. BQ7 document. And just for your information, just FYI, no particular ruling in place, but BQ7, PV9, which you'll find on page 30, and CPC 3, page 31, deal with the same subject. Just so that you're all aware as we deliberate on this particular amendment. This is BQ7. Mr. Champoux.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The part we wanted to add in BQ7 would be to paragraph 3.1i, 3.1i again, and the change would simply be to add that should recognize and support Canada's linguistic duality by placing significant importance on the creation, production, and broadcasting of French language original programs, including those from French linguistic minority communities.
Okay, Madame Bissette, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to Mr. Champoux. I think we really do recognize the importance of protecting French Francophone content. I think that BQ7 is a good addition. It is complementary to my colleague Mr. Housefather's addition, so we will be voting in favor.
Okay. Do I see any further discussion? Monsieur Reyes, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Reyes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dear colleagues, Mr. Champoux, we have two resolutions that are very similar, the one that I will be proposing later. Perhaps we could propose a small amendment to yours. The big difference is that when I tabled my amendment, we mention French language original, or rather, original French language content. It might be my mistake regarding the wording, but I think that that really defines content that is made here first and not just something that's made in French in a different country. So I think that making that change would be worthwhile to specify. So production and broadcasting of, actually, excuse me, I just saw the difference. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so I can assume that you're not putting forward a sub-amendment. Okay. I see no further discussion. Let us now go to a vote. This is on BQ7. BQ7. Shall the amendment carry? And so carried. BQ7. Okay, now we go to TV8, Partie Vert. Mr. Manley, that would be you, sir.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. So this amendment, the Act states that programming provided by the Canadian Broadcasting System should be drawn from local, regional, national, and international sources. And this amendment adds language to specify that at the local level, the system should include programming from community broadcasters specifically. Community broadcasters should be included because they collaborate with local organizations and community members. They're uniquely positioned to provide varied and comprehensive programming that meets the real needs of different audiences. And community broadcasters are best suited to meet these criteria compared with other models of production. This amendment also amends paragraph 311 to replace men, women, and children of all ages with people of all ages. Thank you.
Okay. Seeing no further discussion, we now go to a vote. All right. Shall PV8 carry?
No.
Oh, I hear no. Okay.
Mr. Chair, would it
One moment, please. Ms. DeBruzen, go ahead.
just wondering if we can try and use that fancy on division thing.
Yeah, I normally wouldn't go to it unless someone has to say it. I don't want to be the one to suggest it, but maybe since you brought it up, Mr. Reyes, would you like a recorded vote, Mr. Reyes?
Excusez-moi, Monsieur le Président.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, could you repeat your question?
We decided that there were four ways to vote. Either silence would be carried. You can say carried on division or negatived on division, or you can do a recorded vote. It was Mr.
Adopté avec
Bruce.
distance.
On division.
Non, accepté avec distance, Monsieur le Président.
Accepted on division, Mr. Chair.
So on division? Sorry, did you say carried on division? I believe you did. Yes. Carried on division. Yes, carried on division. Okay. That's PV8. Okay. Sorry, folks. Oh, never mind. My papers were out of order there. I apologize. We are now going to, if I got this right, CPC 2. And this was submitted by Mr. Shields. Mr. Shields, are you up, sir?
You bet. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just like to return this to the original clause that was stated in the current bills, in the current document that we had previously by putting the word national back in, which national for some reason was taken out. And I would like to propose that we put the word national back in so it covers news, current events from local, regional to the national and international. From the original bill that we had, Broadcasting Act national was in it. And in this version, the word national is taken out.
Thank you. And Mr. Lewis.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to say that as a government, we agree with that. I think that's a good addition to further support local journalism, and we heard from many witnesses and the importance of that. So we appreciate the amendment, and we'll be supporting it.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll now go to a vote. Shall CPC 2 carry? Carried. We now go to PV9. Mr. Manley.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Merci. Cet amendment.
Thank you. This amendment highlights the importance of French language broadcasting content.
I see Madame Bissette.
Ms. Bissette? Yes, thank you, Chair. I think we already supported Lib 3 and one other amendment that do the same as this one does, so I don't think we necessarily need to carry it, but I would like to hear my colleagues' opinions. Thank you.
Mr. Shampoo.
J'allais faire le même commentaire.
I was going to make the same comment, actually. The proposed amendment is not necessarily at the same place, but it has the same intent. So it is to the discretion of the experts to let us know if we need to carry it as well. But I thought we had already achieved the same objective.
Okay. Seeing no further discussion, we now go to a vote. Shall PV9 carry?
No.
No.
No. Okay, now we go to a recorded vote. Madam Clerk?
Can we negative on division?
Yeah, once again, I'd just like to remind everyone that if you want to do that, and I prefer you bellow that from the beginning. I can't make the interpretation whether you want to division or not. Go ahead, Mr. Brusen.
I'm just going to apologize. Part of the problem is because we're not in the same room, it's a little harder to see if that's what's necessary. That's the only reason. I apologize for the slight delay there.
I see. Okay, I'll just be a little bit more patient. I'll hear for negative on division before I make a judgment. Then how's that? Try to make this move along. So do I hear negative on division? Okay, I hear no one calling for a recorded vote. So we'll negative on division, PV9. Okay, now that brings us to CPC 3. Monsieur Reyes.
Mr. Reyes. Mr. Chair, seems to me that earlier you mentioned that if BQ7 were carried, CPC 3 would no longer be movable.
Sorry, Mr. Reyes. I'm going to have to ask you to repeat it because my audio wasn't the best. Go ahead, please. Please repeat that.
Aucun problème.
No problem, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to mention that a few moments ago you said that if BQ7 was carried, which it was, then CPC 3 was no longer necessary.
Well, what happens is it's dealing with the same subject. It's not necessarily the same, but in its unless I'm wrong, I'm going to turn to Mr. Mela to help me out on this one. They are dealing with the same subject, Mr. Mela. Do you want to provide a couple more details about the similarities here of BQ7 CPC 3?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, indeed, I did highlight the fact that PQ7, PV9, and CPC3 were dealing with the same subject matter. So since one was adopted already, I'm not sure if the new one, CPC3, is needed or not, but this is up to the committee to decide.
Right. So basically, it is up to us at this point if you want to proceed. So basically, Mr. Reyes, CPC3 is in your name. You have a choice. You can either move it or not. I'll leave that up to you.
Bon, mais si je me
Okay, well, I think that you can never be too careful. So even though I think it says the same thing, I will table it.
Okay. Back to CPC 3. You all have it in front of you. Let's now proceed with discussion. Anybody like to discuss? Madame Bissette, s'il vous plaît.
Ms. Bissett, please. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I understand that Mr. Reyes would like to still add this, but if we already said the same thing with BQ7, I don't think it's necessary to add it. Thanks.
Okay. Mr. Housefather, go ahead, please.
Mr. Chair, the same perspective as Madame Bessade. I think this was covered in the original Bloc Québécois amendment. I just wanted to point out, Mr. Chair, again, a purely logistical question. When PV9 that was meant to replace after line 7 on page 4, the previous motion was defeated on division. In my view, that would render this one not even admissible, given that its content was identical to what we just defeated in the previous resolution, in the previous amendment. So I just also just mention that for the future, because I think they're two essentially identical amendments in the same place. And once we defeat one, I do believe the other one at that point is essentially squelched, because we just defeated the exact same content in the same line. But for you to consider, Mr. Chair, otherwise I'm totally fine to just move to a vote on this.
Well, yeah, I will consider it, obviously, yes, but I can't technically rule this out as per se, because under the normal rules and standards and under the legislative process or the sort of committee process. So I have to let it proceed. It's more of a judgment on your part, which is to say whether you do feel it is similar or not. I leave that to the committee members to decide, as it then you're dealing with purely the content level of it. Normally, when I negate other amendments, usually it's a line conflict of which there's a substantial change enough so that I have to make that ruling. In this case, it is not. So what we're going to do, I have to let it proceed. I'm afraid. I understand what you're saying. Content-wise, we're looking at a lot of the same. I better leave it at that, or I'm going to drift into being partial about the content, and I don't want to go there. as your chair. That's not my job. Nevertheless, do I see any? But thank you anyway. But Mr. Housefather, thanks for that. I appreciate it. So do I see any further discussion on CPC 3? Seeing none, we now go to a vote. Shall CPC 3 carry?
Can I propose it be negatived on division?
Most certainly can. Negatived on division? And so be it. Negatived on division. Okay, we now go to PV 10. Mr. Manley.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. This amendment again addresses the community element. This amendment adds that Canada's broadcasting policy should enable public participation in public dialogue through the community element. The Act states that the public should be exposed to differing views on matters of public concern, which assumes a private or public sector model of production in which Canadians are a passive audience to content created by a privileged class of journalists and producers. The community element enables the direct participation of members of the public on matters of public concern. I'm hoping members of the committee will support this. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Manley, you've given me some food for thought here. Folks, I'm going to have to take 30 seconds for just a quick clarification. I'm going to suspend literally for under a minute. There's just one thing I need to clarify with our legislative clerk. So just 1 minute. What you're proposing is I get the aspect of being passive audience over the years, so on and so forth. The issue of direct participation is one that I had to think upon because it is through the Canadian broadcast policy. Requires a new concept brought in here to way it normally is done. Now I could go on for an hour as to how, but I just don't have that time. But in the opinion of the chair, PV10 brings forward that new concept, and that is beyond the scope of the bill. I'm ruling on the particular procedure as dictated by rules of the committee. So unfortunately, Mr. Manley, I have to rule this particular amendment out of order. Okay, we now move on. We now go on to, that was PV 10, and we now go to Lib 4. And under Lib 4, just want to say that if Lib 4 is adopted, BQ8 cannot be moved as they are identical. And if lib4 is negatived, so is BQ8 for the same reason. So we're talking about lib4, but it's also tied to BQ8, which normally would follow. So that being said, lib4. Oh, sorry. Sorry. Oh, okay. Mr. Reyes, could you go on mute, please? Sorry. Thank you. So now we go on to lib4. And who do I see? Oh, Mr. Housefather, sorry. Go ahead.
Oui, Monsieur le Président, merci.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Thank you. I see that I propose the exact same amendment as my colleague, Mr. Champoux. We listened to the witnesses, and now in K13, it mentions a range of English and French language programs should be offered to all Canadians. That amendment is very simple.
Remove the word progressively, parce que je crois que
Remove that word because I believe those services should be available not only gradually, but as soon as possible, immediately. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Do I see any further discussion on lib4? Seeing none, we will now go to a vote. Shall lib4 carry? Okay. I'm going to leave it. I'm going to leave more space there, so it gives you a chance to respond, because I might be going too quickly. But nevertheless, let me try this again. So lib4 carry. All right. Okay, there we go. Lib4 is carried. Therefore, we have to take off your schedule BQ8 and cannot be moved. Okay, we now go to PV11, and just another note, if PV11 is adopted, G3 and BQ9 cannot be moved as they are identical. If PV11 is negatived, both G3 and BQ9 will be negatived as well. And of course, by the way, G means government amendment, and they're coming up later. But right now we have PV11, Mr. Manley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As written, the bill only provides for programming undertakings carried on by Indigenous persons in Canada's broadcasting policy, and this excludes online undertakings. So this amendment replaces programming undertakings with broadcasting undertakings so that online undertakings are included by definition. This amendment was recommended by APTN, so I hope people support it. Thank you.
Okay, do I see any further discussion? Ms. Ian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to say
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
There's some sort of technical glitch. I couldn't hear for a second. It sounded like I got knocked out, but I just wanted to thank my honorable colleague for putting this amendment forward. We heard from several witnesses on this, including APTN, as he pointed out, and am in full support of this.
Okay. Seeing no further discussion, shall PV11 carry? So done. PV11 carried. And as I mentioned earlier, now go to your schedule. That takes out G3 as well as BQ9, as they are identical. We now move on to PV12. Mr. Manley. Oh, sorry, Mr. Reyes, I saw your hand up. Sorry, Mr. Manley, I got to go Mr. Reyes first.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If possible, I'd like to know if we could take a quick health break for 3 or 4 minutes and resume immediately after, if the committee agrees. Not for too long, but if we wanted to go and grab a drink or go to the facilities. Thank you.
Valid point, Mr. Reyes. Maybe one that eluded me at the beginning. I should have brought that up. So thank you for putting me back on the right track. Do I see any objections to using the washroom? No?
I just want to note that I got to
Mr.
reboot my
Manley.
computer. If you can see the problem going on with my screen here, I just
Okay, yes, we
need
can.
to clear this up. I'm having some issues.
Yes, at times it seems like the Land Rover on the planet Mars has a better reception. than yours. That's no reflection on your abilities. But
No, it's
nevertheless,
just
hopefully we
systems.
get it fixed.
Okay, thanks. I'll be
Okay.
right back.
So we're going to suspend for just folks. I'll say 5 minutes or less, please. Thank you. Suspension. We are now going into PV 12. Sorry. Do I see Mr. Manley? Go ahead, Mr. Manley. Oh, look, your reception is much better. Well,
Yeah,
welcome
cleaned
back.
right up. I have been having problems with this computer. Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. This amendment carries on with this theme that I have about the community media. This amendment adds that Canada's broadcasting policy should not only include programming carried on by Indigenous persons, but also by Indigenous community media. It recognizes that Indigenous persons and Indigenous community media are uniquely positioned to serve Indigenous communities. Indigenous community media is an important component of programming that reflects Indigenous cultures in Canada, and community media have a lower cost structure and work to preserve Indigenous languages, tell Indigenous stories, and equip Indigenous youth and community members of all ages and digital skills. And I'll just note that I was a co-producer on the first preschool show on APTN when it launched, and that many of the people, I did 64 episodes of that program in post-production, and many of the people that worked on that programming that came out of community media, came out of the nonprofit world, where they were trained and gained skills and developed careers and went on into the mainstream broadcasting world. And so it's a really important training ground and a place for cultural expression and cultural identity. So I hope people will support this amendment as well. Thank you.
Mr. Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yes, I want to commend my colleague for bringing this amendment forward. And though we support the principle of it, my concern is where do we stop? We want to make sure this legislation is inclusive and broad, and have that the policy and framework enables everyone to be concluded. But creating small amendments that start including some could come at the expense of excluding others. So we don't see the need to have this as a defining portion of the bill. But I'd love to hear further discussion.
Mr. Manley? Did you? Okay, Mr. Shampoo.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it is very, very good for us to highlight Indigenous programming in Indigenous languages and how that should be offered to Indigenous communities and all of Canadians. But I think perhaps for the legal clerks or other staff in the House, there's one part that seems superfluous to me. It's the part where we specify they're uniquely positioned to serve smaller, remote, and urban Indigenous communities. I think that might be what Mr. Lewis was referring to, that the fact that that might exclude other types of media. I just want to check if that phrasing has a specific meaning or if it's more symbolic than otherwise.
Mr. Shampoo, are you questioning, would you like to go to the Canadian Heritage staff, or were you talking to Mr. Lewis?
Au département.
To the department, please.
Okay. So who from the department would like to take it? Mr. Ripley.
Oui, merci, Mr. President.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Shampoo, for the question. I would note that the current Act does not define the value of each element, each component of the broadcasting system. We know that there's a private element, there's a public element, there's Télé-Québec, Knowledge Network, etc., and we know that there's a community component. But the Act does not necessarily define the value of each of those elements. So the broadcasting system in general is defined. Programming is also mentioned, and it's defined that programming should do certain things. But when it comes to the public aspect needing to play a role and the community aspect and the private aspect needing to play a role, that's not defined. Thank you.
Mr. Housefather.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a small question for the department officials as well. I've noted in this amendment the term Indigenous community media, and I don't believe that this term appears anywhere or is defined anywhere in the Act. I'm just wondering about what is the ramification of that, given that we're using a term that's different from programming or broadcasting undertakings that seem to be the terms we're using everywhere else. Thank you.
Mr. Ripley.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Housefather, and you're correct. The term community media is not defined. Question for the committee if it wishes to support the amendment, whether something like broadcasting undertaking might be more appropriate and more aligned with the overall terminology of the Act.
I have Mr. Manley.
Yeah, I thought we had already defined community media at the TV1 level. So we agreed to add community media to the definition. Yeah, if we wanted to take out the word Indigenous community media, because community media is important in small communities, and this is where, in northern communities, in remote communities, where cultural expression is expanded upon, where you get elders on television speaking in their Indigenous language, where young children are watching and tuned into their own culture and to their own traditions. And so supporting this, I think, is important, and I think it's important for the government as part of our reconciliation process to ensure that there are adequate resources for sharing culture and for cultural revitalization after a long history of cultural destruction for Indigenous people. So if you want to have a sub amendment to take out the word Indigenous, so it's just and community media, which are uniquely positioned to serve smaller and remote urban Indigenous communities, I would be amenable to that.
Mr. Reyes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a quick question for our officials. I think that the term community media is extremely important. Mr. Housefather mentioned that it's not used anywhere, but if it is necessary, I would prefer that we keep it. This doesn't undermine what is being proposed about Indigenous peoples, but I think that community media should be defined in the Act. So I'd like a comment from the department.
Okay, so to the department, Mr. Ripley.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. From what I understood from work last Friday, I think we defined community element. That is the wording, if I remember correctly. And that just means what that makes a reference to the fact that media is not defined anywhere in the Act. But if the committee would like to use a broader term, broadcast undertaking would be appropriate because it includes online companies and broadcasting companies. So I just want to highlight that if the committee uses the term community media, that term is not currently defined in the Act. And Friday, if I remember well, it was community element.
You're on mute, sir.
Can I propose an amendment to this so that it reads carried on by Indigenous persons through the community element, which is uniquely positioned to serve smaller and remote and urban communities.
There we go to Mr. Shampoo. I think you might, Mr. Shampoo, are you
En
proposing?
fait, si je ne me trompe pas, monsieur.
Actually, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Chair, I don't think one can amend one's own amendment. So I was going to propose an amendment to Mr. Manley's amendment. I just want to make sure that I'm moving in the right direction of the idea we want to achieve. So I would propose to say programs, or rather using the word and the community element. And that's where I would end the sentence with community element. Is that acceptable?
Yeah, that's where I was going with that. Thank you for filling that in. Mr. Manley, I think this is put back to you at this point. Sorry, are you moving a sub-amendment, Mr. Shampoo, or are you seeking clarification for Mr. Manley first before you do that?
Je voudrais m'assurer.
I would like to make sure that the sub-amendment I'm proposing does not go against Mr. Manley's intentions.
Okay, I'll allow it. Mr. Manley.
That works for me. I appreciate that. We don't need to go further into the uniquely positioned part because I think that's understood. Thank you.
For the sake of our for our legislative clerk, Mr. Shampoo, can you repeat yourself, please?
Souhaitez-vous que je lise?
Would you like me to read the full amendment, including the change, which is just at the end, Mr. Chair?
Actually, if you could just tell us what your sub-amendment is, we'll do that for now.
D'accord.
Okay, so I'm taking out the text starting at and Indigenous community media and until the end, and replace it by community element.
Does this bear repeating, or is everyone okay with what was proposed? It's not a big one. So can I just leave it as what Mr. Shampoo explained? I think that's sufficient. Okay. Would there be any further discussion on the sub-amendment from Mr. Shampoo regarding PV12? Seeing no further discussion, let's go to a vote. Shall the sub-amendment by Mr. Shampoo of PV12 carry? Hearing nothing, carried. We now go back to the main motion, or the main amendment, sorry. That's PV12. Seeing no further discussion, shall PV12 as amended be carried? And carried as amended. Now to PV13. Mr. Manley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This amendment adds that persons with disabilities should have adequate resources to develop their own community media, and persons with disabilities can adapt technology and obtain technical support through community media. And again, you shouldn't be surprised that I do have experience in this area. I've trained people of all kinds of different abilities to work in media, including working with deaf people. I trained them in video production and actually witnessed somebody creating a soundtrack who was deaf by working with vibration. And just an interesting note: when we did the premiere of that film, he gave everybody a balloon, and we listened to the soundtrack through the vibration of the balloon, and that's how he learned to go to movies as a child. He happened to go to a movie after going to a fair with a balloon in his hand, and that's how he translated the intensity of the sound in the theater. And I think with the right kind of technologies, we can have more participation in media by people with diverse abilities. So I hope people will consider this, but I do have a little pink note on the side that the chair is going to be talking about this amendment as well. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. You're rather prescient. Again, I said earlier, I will say to you now, given the subject matter and the story you just told, which I think is a fantastic one. Please don't take this in the wrong way, but unfortunately, we have to rule this out of order. This one is a little more straightforward. Actually, it's straight down the middle as to why I cannot, and I'll refer back to our rule book again that we use here, and that is the specific programming resources to allow for persons with disabilities is what you're talking about here. Develop their own community media, and again, no reflection on that. It just requires what we call a royal recommendation, and it requires essentially new spending. And the rule book states, since an amendment may not infringe upon the financial initiative of the Crown, the government, or the executive, it is inadmissible if it imposes a charge on the public treasury, or if it extends the objects or purposes or relaxes the conditions and qualifications specified in that royal recommendation. So the amendment that you bring forward, known as PV 13, is a new concept, appears to require a royal recommendation, not talked about in the original bill. Therefore, I have to rule this amendment to be inadmissible. But I thoroughly enjoyed the stories that you brought to it. Thank you, Mr. Manley. Okay, we now go to PV 14. Mr. Manley, you're up again.
Thank you. I'm on a bit of a roll here. The purpose of this amendment is to describe the role of the community element in Canada's broadcasting policy. This amendment replaces the description for alternative television programming services in the broadcasting policy section of the Act with community element. Very few alternative programming services of the type described in the Act actually exist, and the section is never actionable or used in policy making, yet the description almost exactly fits what the community element does. So I'm hoping that members of the committee will consider this amendment. Thank you.
Do I see any discussion? Mr. Housefather.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And while I appreciate the defining the role of the community element, which I think is what Mr. Manley is trying to do here, I would point out that I don't believe that the Act or the bill actually define any of the elements of the broadcasting system, whether public, whether private, whether community. And there's some elements in here, for example, Part 4, where we're talking about nonprofit participative structures, where we, in the definition of community element, remove the words nonprofit. So I guess I would just like to ask the officials what their sense is of how this would intertwine with the rest of the bill, and whether they have any comments about it. Thank you.
Okay, just looking to the department for who would like to. Oh, Ms. Joy. You have the floor.
Sorry, I'm just unmuting. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson and Mr. Housefather for the question. Yes, that's correct. We had spoken about the concern about nonprofit on Friday, and you're absolutely right. In no place in the Act does the Act provide a definition or define a role for any of the elements of the broadcasting system. So you're right. The private element, the public element, and the community element are all, the role of those elements is left undefined. And the not for profit element we had discussed. The community element of the broadcasting system does include some for-profit organizations, and so this would be a significant change to the Act.
Mr. Manley? No?
Sorry, I left my hand up.
Okay. That being said, Mr. Housefather.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. I just have one additional question to the officials again. With respect to Section 5, being made available throughout Canada through all platforms available, would this impose a requirement on companies that simply distribute to include community programming? Meaning it would be an obligation on everything, which I don't even know how we could impose. Thank you.
Ms. Joy?
Thank you for the question once again. The term platform is also not defined in the Act, so we are left unsure about how to interpret Part 5. It's not clear to me whether this means all platforms, as in any kind of broadcasting undertaking that provides a distribution service, or if this is to refer to any type of platform. So is this meant to mean that community broadcasting should be made available online, over satellite systems, over cable systems? That part of the definition is unclear.
Ms. McPherson.
I just wanted to check with perhaps with you, Mr. Chair, but assuming that we do vote on PV 14, does that mean that NDP 8 is it considered not, would that be withdrawn then or taken away?
Nope.
Okay.
Mr. Shampoo.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chair, far be it from me to question what Ms. McPherson said, but they are two very similar amendments. And DP 8, it seems to be pretty much a copy-paste.
Our ruling is no, not entirely. I understand where you're coming from. I truly appreciate it. This is one of those times where I use the expression "we're dancing on the head of the pin," but nevertheless, that's this may, as we move on, I should be able to provide some more information on that. Mr. Housefather.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I guess in culmination of my previous questions, I'm going to vote against because I find there's a lot of uncertainties introduced by this amendment, and I do believe this would make NDP 8 almost impossible to introduce because of the conflictual terms. I don't know how you would reconcile the two, because some things are different and some things are the same and written differently. And so anyways, I'm going to vote against. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Manley.
I would be open to sub amendments to this because I do understand that the word nonprofit needs to be removed because we've already discussed that with earlier amendments, and I could see how 5 would be problematic. But I'm hoping that there are parts of this that the committee does see worth supporting. Thanks.
We are still on PV 14, folks. Okay. Seeing no discussion, I'm going to call for a vote. Again, this is PV 14. Shall the amendment carry?
No.
No. Okay. I hear no. Madam Clerk?
Yes, sir. PV 14.
Yes.
Mr. Housefather.
No.
Madame Bissette.
No.
Mr. Bruson. Ms. Ian.
No.
Mr. Bruson, can I just get that from you again? No, thank you. Mr. Lewis?
Against.
Monsieur Reyes? Monsieur Reyes?
No.
Merci. Mr. Aitchison?
No.
Mr. Shields?
No.
Mr. Waugh?
No.
Mr. Shampoo?
No.
Ms. McPherson?
No.
Mr. Chair, that's 12 nays. 11 nays, apologize.
Okay. I declare that the amendment is negative. Now we are on to PV 15. Mr. Manley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This amendment adds that programming provided through community elements should be made available for archival purposes to Library and Archives of Canada, as well as local cultural institutions that represent public interest. Archiving community programming is very important. There's been 40 years of audiovisual archives for over 200 communities that have been destroyed since 1991, where there is no other audiovisual record. And I've seen this happen personally without any notification. When Shaw took over for Rogers in Victoria, I was over working in Vancouver after doing hours and hours of weeks and weeks of programming, and it all just went to the landfill. And there were parts of that that were really important chunks of the community record that had been documented. And people were looking for that years later and nowhere to be found. So I understand that I've got a little pink note on this one as well. And I've talked to ministry officials about maybe other avenues for dealing with this, but I'll let you bring up that pink note I have.
You seem to be catching on quite well, Mr. Manley, how this works. Indeed, I have to make a ruling on this one. And I just want to point out to members about this. And this, of course, is specific to the passage in PV15 that says, let me go to it. Right, so made available to the Library and Archives of Canada for archival purposes and to local cultural. Well, it turns out that being made available to the public through archival means such as the Library and Archives of Canada is an amendment that would go beyond the scope of the bill. Again, I refer back to the parent bill, which doesn't provide for that. So therefore, according to our rules and regulations, once more, it's not only it's beyond the scope and it certainly is beyond the principle of the bill to proceed any further on P15. It does propose a new concept that is beyond the scope, similar to rulings in the past. So again, unfortunately, I have to rule that to be inadmissible. That being said, I have to call my dear friend over at the legislative clerk. I have, if I could just get 1 minute or less for just a little suspension, just to clarify one thing. Thank you. Thank you for being patient. That, of course, was PV15, which we ruled inadmissible. We now go on to BQ10. BQ10, Mr. Champoux.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With BQ10, we want to make sure that online undertakings provide programming services of other broadcasting undertakings should ensure the discoverability of Canadian programming services and original Canadian content, including French language original content. We want for this to be showcased. We want it to be discoverable in an equitable proportion to Anglophone and foreign content. And we also want to make sure that when programming services are supplied to them by other broadcasting undertakings under contractual arrangements, that they provide reasonable terms for the carriage, packaging, and retailing of those programming services. I think that is one extra insurance that we wanted to add in.
Okay. Mr. Shields.
Thank you. For clarification, when you've got the word equitable proportion, can you define what you mean?
Before we get to that, define you.
Sorry, Mr. Champoux.
Okay. How about we go to Mr. Shampoo first, and then we'll go to Ms. Ian. Mr. Shampoo.
Dans la proportion
In an equitable proportion, well, I think that what we want to maintain here is the proportion of space that is given in general to Francophone content and original content. So it's simply a reference to what we will define as an equitable proportion under the Act. Perhaps Mr. Mela could speak about the subtlety of that wording.
Okay. We're going to, Ms. Ian, your patience. I hope we're going to go to Mr. Mela first. Mela, since the question was put to him, and then we'll go to Ms. Ian. Mr. Mela, are you there?
I am. Est-ce que M. Champoux pourrait répéter la question?
Could Mr. Champoux repeat the question, please? I'm not sure I understood. Certainly. So Mr. Shields asked about equitable proportion for original Canadian content, especially original French language content. So, Mr. Shields, what we meant by that term was to make sure that the equitable proportion would refer to what we would consider to be an equitable proportion between French language and Canadian content in the Act's interpretation.
Thank you, Mr.
Okay. Mr. Mela.
Sorry, thank you, Mr. Chair. La question serait plutôt pour.
The question would be better put to department officials than to myself as the legislative clerk.
Yes, indeed. Let's go to, I'm looking for a volunteer from the department on this particular issue. I just need a show of hand. Which one would like to speak? Oh, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to get clarity on the specific portion we're discussing. So it's the part of subparagraph I that reads in an equitable proportion. Is that what it is? Okay.
Yes, it is.
I mean, to a certain degree, this will be interpreted by the CRTC. We don't have a it's not a defined term. It's not something that is indicated elsewhere in the Act, and it would be up for interpretation by the Commission.
Okay, I'm now going to go to Ms. Ian. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and so appreciate Mr. Shampoo pinpointing discoverability, among other things, in this amendment. I'm wondering if we might, Mr. Chair, propose a sub-amendment to delete Part 2, because that seems to be the biggest issue here when programming services are supplied to them by other broadcasting undertakings and so forth.
Okay, so just so that I'm clear before I go to Mr. Shampoo, you want to eliminate, okay, under Q 1 and 2, you want to eliminate the entire number 2. Or should I say eliminate 2 in its entirety? I'm just looking for, is that good, Ms. Ian?
This seems to be the issue, yes.
Okay, that would be your sub-amendment.
Correct.
So now we're on to the sub-amendment. I'm going to go to Mr. Shampoo and then Mr. Hausfeld. Mr. Shampoo.
Je n'ai pas entendu que c'était.
I didn't hear what the concern was around that section. To my knowledge, it had not been stated as being a concern. I'd like to hear Ms. Ian's arguments. However, before anything else, I'd like to come back to what Mr. Smith just said. I just want to check and make sure that when it comes to equitable proportion, would it be understood that we want to create an adequate and satisfactory proportion of Canadian and Francophone content? So I would like to just make sure I understand, even if it is the Commission that will be interpreting the Act, that the wording that we used in this amendment, if the officials think that it will be perceived like that.
I'm going to go to, I think the question was put to Mr. Smith first, the department, and then I'm going to follow that with Mr. Housefather. Mr. Smith.
I think to answer the question, I agree that with Mr. Shampoo's statement that it's something that the Act is striving towards and something that that is obviously reflected in several other objectives of the Act as amended or as moved by the members of the committee on Friday and today as well. But the specific wording in an equitable proportion is something to be determined by the Commission. I'm not sure what else I could add to that question.
Mr. Housefather.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I know I'm supposed to speak to Ms. Ian's sub-amendment, but I actually have a question, if it's okay, Mr. Chair. Et avec la permission de...
And with Mr. Champoux' permission, because I agree with his objectives, with what he's trying to do with Q and I.
Department is, with these not, like, I'm not sure that this amendment is in the right place in the Act. Wouldn't this really, or shouldn't these issues be dealt with under the order and regulation making powers of the Commission? In which case, maybe Mr. Champoux would be better placed to try to amend G8 or G9 that are coming up later. Like, if we wanted to achieve this, what would be the best place in the Act to include, for example, Q and subparagraph 1?
Mr. Champoux.
En fait, oui.
Monsieur le Président, c'était une question
Sorry.
pour...
Mr. Chair, I would like to put that question to the department.
Oh, I'm sorry. You started with Mr. Champoux. Can I go to the department? Mr. Smith, am I returning to you again?
I think Mr. Ripley would like to answer this question.
Mr. Ripley.
Merci, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Housefather, for the question. Here's what I would say. Yes, certainly, there are already many objectives that talk about the importance of Canadian programming, of French language programming, and of original programming. I would say that yes, the components of this proposed amendment do refer to the tools that should be used to achieve those objectives. I'll give you an example. There's mention of conditions, of obligations, of discoverability for online undertakings. So yes, it is reasonable to believe that the Commission will, or the board created by the Commission, will impose those, Mr. Chair.
Juste pour préciser que...
I would just like to specify that paragraph II is in order to reflect the fact that the CRTC will be able to regulate broadcasting undertakings in an equitable manner. So I think it's fine to put it in this part of the Act too.
Okay. Just so that everyone is still aware, we're on the sub-amendment as proposed by Ms. Ian, straightforward. She proposes to eliminate number, I guess, 2 little I, maybe is that what's called? Right. So eliminate that as part of the sub-amendment. Seeing no further conversation, we'll go to the
Mr.
votes.
Chair,
Oh,
legislative
sorry,
clerk
I
here.
see Mr. Miller, who's interrupted me, most likely for a very good reason.
You to determine if it's a good reason or not, but thank you. I just wanted to point out that if the sub-amendment is adopted, there would be a problem with the French version. There would be a problem altogether, but more likely with the French version, because you would have, in French, radiodiffusion devrait à la fois.
Broadcasting would have two, and this includes I and II, and then we would have to remove the part à la fois in French, and then the text would say, broadcasting undertakings should ensure the discoverability of services, etc.
And then the little I would go as well. So just to make sure that we do that at the same time, if that were the case. The amendment adopted as amended.
Okay, so sorry, Mr. Bruce, go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify because I've had the conversation, heard the conversation going back and forth, but I just wanted to clarify that that we have from the department the answer about the terms of carriage part of 2i, and if that presents any challenges.
Okay, I'm looking for someone from the department. Sorry, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, with respect to subparagraph 2, this is a fairly heavy requirement that that would involve some I suppose intervention from the commission with respect to the packages, contractual arrangements, and terms of carriage. So if the committee is in support of an approach that would allow that, then they should be aware that this is what would come with subparagraph 2 as well.
Okay. So just to recap, as Mr. Mela, our legislative clerk, pointed out, the eliminating 2 little I in the English version, subparagraph 2, if you wish, requires changes to both I and little double I on the French translation. Mr. Mela, did I get that correct?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I can recap if you want to what the changes
yes,
would
please.
be.
This I'll get Mr. Mela to recap, and then we could go to a vote if there's no further discussion. Mr. Mela, please.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So in French, we would have to remove the ending à la fois.
Both.
Devrait, and then remove à la fois and the semicolon there, and then remove the little I, and then the sentence would be one sentence. Radiodiffusion devrait assurer la découvrabilité des services, etc. And then in English, we would have to remove the little I, so undertaking should ensure, and then at the end, we should remove the end, because there is no number 2 anymore, so the end does not apply. At the end of little 1I.
Okay. So there you have the language cleaned up. For the intent is still the same, Ms. Ian. I don't see any objection from you outright. I'm assuming that you're okay with the explanation as put forward by Mr. Mela for your sub-amendment. Seeing no further discussion, we now go to a vote on the sub-amendment of BQ10 from Ms. Ian. Will the sub-amendment carry?
No. No.
Okay. I'm going to call for a recorded vote. Madam Clerk?
Yes, sir. Ms. Ian's sub-amendment of BQ10. Mr. Housefather?
Yes.
Madame Bissette? Madame Bissette? Madame Bissette?
Désolée, j'étais dans l'une, j'ai pas entendu.
Sur la question de le sous-amendement de Madame Ian sur BQ10.
Oui.
Merci. Ms. Bruson?
Yes.
Ms. Ian?
Yes.
Mr. Lewis?
For.
Thank you. Monsieur Reyes?
No.
Mr. Aitchison?
No.
Mr. Shields?
No.
Mr. Waugh?
No.
Monsieur Champoux?
No.
Ms. McPherson?
No.
6 yeas, 5 nays. Sorry, 6 nays, 5 yeas. My apologies.
Could you repeat that one more time,
Yes,
Madam
sir.
Clerk,
My
just to make sure?
apologies. 6 nays, 5 yeas.
Okay. I declare the sub-amendment negative. We now go back to the main motion. Again, this is the main amendment. This is BQ10. BQ10, as you see on page 42 of your package. Seeing no, Mr. Housefather.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I mean, I think that this is an amendment where a lot of these things are reasonable. I don't think I repeat, I don't think this is in the right place in the Act. And I also have one more question, which is with respect to the way that Q is now worded. It says online undertakings that provide the programming services of other broadcasting undertakings should ensure discoverability. Does that not then lead to only online undertakings having this obligation and not other broadcasting undertakings? I guess I'd like to ask the department because I'm very confused about that wording. I don't think it creates an equilibrium anymore. Thank you.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the question, Mr. Housefather. So you are correct. Currently in section 9.1, which I'm sure we'll get to in a couple days, there is a condition of service power relating directly to discoverability. And this is not circumscribed to any particular type of broadcasting undertakings. Therefore, introducing this objective in section 3 of the Act could create a perceived conflict between those two sections.
Ms. DeBruzen.
I have another question for the department, which is whether this this amendment poses any trade concerns and what they would be.
Mr. Smith? Oh, Mr. Ripley, sorry.
Thank you for the question, Ms. DeBruzen. I think what I would say is to reiterate the point that Mr. Smith made earlier, that subparagraph 2i indicates that the government's intention here is that generally the contractual arrangements between online undertakings and other programming services that they're distributing, that the CRTC play a very active role in the economic regulation of those contractual relationships. So our understanding would be that there not be a heavy reliance on market forces, but that the CRTC play kind of an active supervision of those contractual relationships. It's fair to say that certain online undertakings, their business model is obviously very much weighted towards free market forces, and would certainly have concerns, I think it's fair to say, about the CRTC being empowered to play that active role in the regulation of their contractual relationships.
Okay. Thank you. And seeing no further discussion, we'll have a vote on the main amendment. That is BQ10, your documents. Shall BQ10 carry?
No.
No.
I hear no. I'm going to go to recorded vote. Madam Clerk?
Yes, sir. On the question of BQ10, Mr. Housefather.
No.
Madame Bessette.
No.
Mr. Bruson.
No.
Ms. Ian.
No.
Mr. Lewis.
No.
Mr. Reyes.
Oui.
Mr. Aitchison.
Yes.
Mr. Shields.
Yes.
Mr. Watt.
Yes.
Mr. Champoux.
Oui, en faveur.
Ms. McPherson.
Yes.
Just take one more second with this. We have 6 yeas, 5 nays.
I declare the amendment carried. Okay, we now go to BQ11. Mr. Champoux.
Mr. Chair, here's what we want to do here. Want to give value to Canadian programming in both official languages as well as Indigenous languages, and ensure that any means of control of the programming generates results, allowing its discovery. I believe this is an important addition, especially when it comes to discoverability of Canadian content.
Ms. DeBruzen?
It might be just on my reading of the wording, but I'm a little bit unclear as to whether what is being suggested by this amendment is the promotion of Canadian programming, or that the programs themselves should be in both official languages as well as in Indigenous languages. I'm just wondering, maybe if the department can clarify what the wording would do.
Okay, I'm looking for someone from the department to answer. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could I have the language again, please, of the amendment?
Yeah. Okay. Do you want the actual amendment read to you?
Yes, please.
Okay. Here's the English version of BQ 11. That Bill C10 in Clause 2 be amended by adding after line 26 on page 4 the following. This is subsection Q. Online undertakings must clearly promote and recommend Canadian programming in both official languages as well as Indigenous languages, and ensure that any means of control of the programming generates results allowing its discovery. And
Thank you, Mr.
Mr.
Chair.
Smith. Yep.
So I guess a couple of things relating to this, perhaps just relating to the way in which the words were presented, is whether the requirement being imposed is that the promotion itself and the recommendations themselves be done in both official languages as well as Indigenous languages, and then I guess understanding whether this is related more towards like a discoverability requirement, as we discussed earlier, or I guess I'm having a bit of a hard time following the intent of the amendment as well.
Mr. Champoux.
Absolument. Puis,
Absolutely. And I agree that I can take this opportunity to clarify. So, in the regulation, there would be the obligation to promote and recommend Canadian programming, including Francophone programming. We're asking that that be done. And they should also publicize it, for example, sending email recommendations of audiovisual content that people can go and consume. So the promotion would be carried out by the online undertakings and online broadcasters, and this would generate discoverability. That's the intent of the amendment. For example, the way Spotify sends recommendations of Canadian and Quebec artists.
Mr. Shields.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So when we have the word clearly in here, I'm going to ask the staff, in the sense, is this then leaving it to the commission to determine and define clearly? I can understand what promote means, but when we put clearly in there, so to the staff, is how would you interpret this? The commission is going to interpret what clearly means?
By staff, you mean department?
Yep.
To the department, we go to looking for a volunteer. Mr. Smith. Oh, sorry, Mr. Olson. I'll let you decide. Mr. Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Shields. Yes, that would be my interpretation. Be up to the CRTC to determine what is clearly promoting and recommending.
Okay. Mr. Shields, your hand is up. Did you want to continue, or
Nope.
are you satisfied? Okay. All right. Seeing no further discussion on BQ 11, no, we now go to a vote. Shall BQ 11 carry?
No.
Oh, did I hear no? I mean, yes, no. So no. All right. Madam Clerk?
Yes, sir. BQ 11, Mr. Housefather.
No.
Madame Bissette.
No.
Mr. Bruson.
No.
Ms. Ian.
No.
Mr. Lewis.
Against.
Monsieur Reyes.
Oui.
Mr. Aitchison.
Yes.
Mr. Shields.
Yes.
Mr. Waugh.
Yes.
Monsieur Champoux,
Oui, bien sûr.
Ms. McPherson,
Yes.
6 yeas, 5 nays.
Declare the amendment carried. So, folks, we're over time by 1 minute. I think that's drawing to a conclusion, unless you all want to continue. And by the looks of all these faces and squares, I get the feeling you don't. So, therefore, when we pick up again on Friday, and by the way, we're going to seek out another 3-hour time slot for Friday, similar to last Friday. And if that doesn't work out, we'll let you know. But we're going to seek out 3 hours as we did before. I'm assuming no objections to that. And when we pick up, we will go to NDP 8 on page 6 when we return on Friday. Any further comments? Nope. Seeing
Monsieur
none.
le Président.
Oh, sure.
Mr. Chair, I have a quick question. Could you just specify, when you say 3 hours, last week we started at 12:30, went until 4 o'clock, so it was 3.5 hours. So we'll be starting at 1 p.m. on Friday? That would be my personal preference. I think 3 hours would suffice.
Oh, I was thinking 12:30 start, but if you want to go from 1 to 4:30,
3.5 hours.
3.5, yeah, okay. Do you want to, would you let, yes, 3.5 hours, yeah, because we went up to 4 o'clock. Well, we went 12:30 to 4 o'clock. I can't recall if there is, I'm going to ask Amy to help me out on this one because I can't remember if 4 o'clock was a cutoff for
Oui,
technical reasons. Oh, Mr. Reyes, go ahead.
Oui, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Our last meeting lasted 3.5 hours, not 3 hours. We started at 12:30 and went until 4 o'clock. But just now you mentioned 3 hours for this coming Friday, and I would prefer just 3 hours. And my reason is the following. There's the question period right before. It doesn't give us much time to eat a little something because we do need to have lunch at lunchtime. So I think it would be appropriate if the meeting lasted only 3 hours from 1 to 4 instead of 12:30 to 4.
Okay,
Si
yeah,
les membres du
my
comité sont
apologies.
d'accord,
I may,
If the committee agrees.
okay. Yeah, sorry. I confused the 3.5 and the 3. That's on me. My apologies. So I have a proposal from 1 to 4 o'clock. Do I see any dissension amongst the ranks and squares on my TV? No? How about we try for 1 to 4? And if it doesn't work, I'll email an alternative. Okay? So 1 to 4 Eastern time. I should clarify that always. 1 to 4 Eastern time for this coming Friday to resume clause by Bill C-10. Okay. All right, folks. Have a good week. We'll see you on Friday, hopefully at 1 Eastern.
Au revoir tout le monde.